The first snowflakes of November fell on the small mountain town of Pinewood Ridge like whispered warnings. Harold Winters, 73 years old with hands as rough as tree bark and a mind sharper than the axes he'd been swinging since childhood, stood in his driveway examining a pile of materials that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. Clear plastic sheeting, old wooden pallets, rope made from hemp he'd twisted himself, and what appeared to be hundreds of glass bottles collected over months from the local recycling center. His neighbor, Patricia Donovan, leaned over the fence with that particular smile people wear when they think they're watching someone lose their mind. "Harold, what on earth are you building now? Some kind of greenhouse? In November?" Her laugh carried across 3 properties. Within an hour, half the neighborhood had found reasons to walk past his house, phones out, recording the old man who was apparently constructing the world's most ridiculous shelter. The weather forecast had been clear for weeks. The meteorologists used words like unprecedented and catastrophic. A polar vortex was descending from the Arctic, bringing temperatures that hadn't been seen in this region for over a century. The news stations showed endless loops of families boarding up windows, stockpiling generators, and evacuating to hotels in the valley below. But Harold Winters wasn't going anywhere. He'd survived 73 winters, and he'd survived this one too, in a shelter so simple it made modern survival gear look like expensive foolishness. If you're watching this story unfold and wondering how one old man with basic materials could outsmart an entire town with their heated homes and expensive equipment, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. What you're about to witness isn't just about survival. It's about understanding principles that our grandparents knew by heart, but we've forgotten in our rush toward complicated solutions. Hit that subscribe button, because the method Harold uses will change how you think about warmth, shelter, and self-reliance forever. The following story is presented as a narrative reconstruction. Harold had learned about thermal mass and passive solar heating not from YouTube videos or survival blogs, but from his grandfather who'd homesteaded in Montana during the Great Depression. The old man had survived winters in a structure made primarily of stone, glass, and ingenuity. No electricity, no gas heating. Just an understanding of how the sun's energy could be captured, stored, and slowly released throughout the longest, coldest nights. The foundation came first. While his neighbors were inside their warm houses ordering expensive survival gear on Amazon, Harold was outside in the pre-storm cold, digging. Not with a backhoe or powered equipment, but with a shovel he'd forged himself 20 years ago, the handle worn smooth by decades of use. He dug down 2 feet into the earth, creating a circular depression about 20 feet in diameter. The ground was already starting to freeze, making each shovel full of battle, but Harold worked with the patient rhythm of a man who understood that rushed work was failed work. Into this depression he began placing stones. Not just any stones, but river rocks he'd been collecting all summer from the creek bed 5 miles away, carried back in a wheelbarrow, 50 pounds at a time. Dark stones, each one selected for its density and color. He knew that dark surfaces absorbed solar radiation better than light ones, and dense stones held heat longer than porous ones. This wasn't guesswork. This was knowledge earned through observation and passed down through generations who couldn't afford to be wrong. Tom Bradley, who lived 2 houses down and worked as an engineer for a tech company, actually stopped his Tesla to yell out the window, "Harold, you know they make these things called space heaters now, right? This isn't the Stone Age." He drove off laughing, probably already composing a social media post about the crazy old man building a rock pile while a historic blizzard approached. But Harold didn't respond. He was too busy calculating angles. The sun, even in November, still rose in the east and set in the west. Even in the weak winter light, it still provided energy. The question was how to capture it, concentrate it, and hold on to it when the sun disappeared and the temperatures plummeted to the bone-breaking cold that was coming. The wooden pallets came next. Harold had collected them from behind the grocery store, selecting only those made from hardwood, rejecting the cheap pine constructions that would warp and fail. He disassembled each pallet carefully, pulling nails with a hammer rather than ripping the wood apart. Each board was inspected, measured, and sorted. The good ones, straight and strong, became the framework. The damaged ones were split into kindling and set aside. He constructed a circular frame around his stone foundation, using techniques that hadn't changed since the first humans figured out how to make structures stand upright. Mortise and tenon joints secured with wooden pegs he carved himself. No screws, no nails where they could fail. Just wood fitting into wood the way it had for thousands of years. The frame rose 6 feet high at the edges and would peak at 10 feet in the center, creating a dome-like structure. Young Marcus Chen, who'd just bought the house next door and worked remotely for some startup that Harold neither understood nor cared about, came outside with his professional camera. "Hey Harold, I'm doing a documentary on alternative lifestyles. Mind if I get some footage of your project here?" The condescension dripped like honey, sweet and sticky and fake. "Free country," Harold replied, not looking up from his work. "Film what you want." "So, what exactly is this going to be? Some kind of primitive shelter demonstration?" "It's going to be where I sleep when that storm hits." Marcus's smile faltered. "You're joking, right? Harold, they're saying it could get down to negative 30 degrees, wind chill even worse. You need real shelter, man. Modern insulation, heating systems." Harold straightened up, his back cracking like rifle shots. "Boy, how much did you pay to heat your house last winter?" "I don't know. Maybe $2,000? What does that have to do with anything?" "I paid nothing. I heat with wood. I cut myself from deadfall on my property. Now, how much is your internet and electricity and all those services you can't live without?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe another 3,000 or 4,000 total. Look, we live in the modern world. These things cost money. And when this storm knocks out your power, which the utility company already said might happen for up to a week, what then?" "I have a generator." "How much gas you got stored?" "Enough." "How much is enough when the roads are impassable and the gas stations are closed?" Marcus didn't answer. He just filmed for another few minutes and left, shaking his head. The transparent covering was the element that made everyone think Harold had finally lost his grip on reality. He began stretching the clear plastic sheeting over his wooden frame, but not in any way that made immediate sense. He created 2 layers with a 6-inch gap between them, stuffing this gap with dried cattail fluff he'd harvested from the marsh behind his property. The cattail down was nature's insulation, used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years, each seed pod producing fibers that trapped air and created thermal barriers. But the genius was in the glass bottles. Harold had collected hundreds of them, all clear glass, all roughly the same size. He began pressing them into the walls, necks pointing inward, creating a honeycomb pattern between the 2 layers of plastic sheeting. Each bottle became a lens, capturing sunlight and directing it inward toward his dark stone foundation. During the day, even weak winter sunlight would be concentrated and multiplied by hundreds of these improvised solar collectors. Sarah Mitchell, the town's self-appointed social media influencer, showed up with her ring light and started live streaming. "Okay guys, you are not going to believe what I'm seeing right now. This elderly gentleman is literally building what looks like a greenhouse made of trash, and he claims he's going to survive the polar vortex of the century in it." The comments are going crazy. Should someone call Adult Protective Services? Is this safe? Harold continued working, methodical and unhurried. He sealed edges with pine pitch he'd rendered himself from fallen trees, heating the sap in an old coffee can over a small fire until it became a waterproof adhesive. He reinforced corners with strips of birch bark, soaked and wrapped, which would shrink tight as they dried. Every material came from nature or was repurposed from what others had thrown away. Nothing purchased, nothing wasted. The entrance was a double-door system, another concept lost to modern building. 2 flaps of the heavy plastic sheeting, offset so that cold air couldn't blow directly inside. The outer flap faced away from the prevailing wind, which in Pinewood Ridge always came from the northwest during winter storms. This wasn't a guess. Harold had lived on this property for 47 years and had watched the weather with the attention most people gave to their phones. Inside the structure, he arranged his stone foundation in a specific pattern. The largest, darkest stones formed a circle in the center. These would be his primary heat battery, absorbing solar energy all day and releasing it slowly through the night. Around this central mass, he created pathways of smaller stones, allowing air to circulate around the heat source. In the spaces between stones, he packed more cattail down, creating insulated channels that would distribute warmth evenly throughout the shelter. The night before the storm was predicted to arrive, the town held an emergency meeting at the community center. The mayor stood at a podium, grave-faced, reading from prepared statements about evacuation procedures and emergency shelters. Harold attended, sitting in the back row, mostly because the community center had good coffee and he'd run out at home. Patricia Donovan stood up during the public comment period. "Mayor, I'm concerned about my neighbor, Harold Winters. He's built some kind of plastic tent in his yard and claims he's going to weather the storm in it. Shouldn't someone check on him? Make sure he's competent to make this decision?" The room turned to look at Harold. The mayor, who'd known Harold for 30 years and had learned better than to underestimate him, sighed. "Harold, you want to address this?" Harold stood up slowly, his flannel shirt and work boots looking out of place among the designer winter gear everyone else wore. "I appreciate the concern, Patricia. Really, I do. But I've prepared for this storm same as everyone else, just in my own way. I won't be a burden on emergency services. I have food, water, and shelter. More than that, I don't need." "But Harold," Patricia pressed, "your shelter is made of plastic and bottles. How can that possibly keep you warm when it's 30 below zero? The same way greenhouses stay warm in winter. The same way root cellars stay cool in summer. The same way caves maintain constant temperatures year-round. It's about understanding thermal mass, insulation, and passive solar collection, principles that worked long before we had electricity and will work long after this storm passes." The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 hours earlier than predicted, with winds that made the weather service recalibrate their instruments twice to confirm the readings were accurate. Harold woke in his regular house at 5 a.m., as he had every morning for 47 years, made himself coffee on his wood stove, and watched through the kitchen window as the sky turned the particular shade of gray that meant serious weather was coming. By 8 a.m., the first bands of snow were falling, not the gentle flakes of a normal winter storm, but hard, driving pellets of ice that sounded like gravel being thrown against the windows. The wind hadn't reached its peak yet, but it was already strong enough to bend the birch trees in Harold's yard at angles that made them look like they were bowing to some invisible force. Harold loaded his supplies into the transparent shelter using a wheelbarrow, making multiple trips while the weather was still manageable. Wool blankets he'd traded for with a woman who raised sheep 3 counties over, exchanging a cord of firewood for enough material to keep him warm. Mason jars filled with stew he'd made from venison he'd hunted himself last fall, the meat slow-cooked with vegetables from his summer garden, until it was tender enough to eat cold if necessary. Water in glass jugs, because Harold didn't trust plastic to not leach chemicals when frozen and thawed repeatedly. A kerosene lamp, not for heat, but for light, though he planned to use it sparingly because his eyes had long ago adapted to living by natural light cycles. The neighbors were watching, of course. Through their double-paned, argon-filled, energy-efficient windows, they watched the crazy old man move into his bottle greenhouse while the worst storm in a century bore down on them. Marcus Chen was live-streaming again, his phone pressed against the glass, narrating for his followers who were scattered across the country, in places where this storm was just an interesting news story rather than an approaching reality. "He's actually doing it, guys. He's actually moving into that thing. The temperature is already down to 15 degrees and dropping fast. Wind chill is at 5 degrees. And this old guy is setting up camp in what looks like an oversized shower curtain held up with sticks and bottles. This is either the most hardcore survival demonstration I've ever seen, or we're about to witness a tragedy in real time." By noon, Harold had sealed himself inside. The double-door entrance system worked exactly as designed. He pushed through the outer flap, let it fall closed behind him, took 2 steps, then pushed through the inner flap. The small vestibule between the 2 doors trapped the cold air, preventing it from rushing directly into the main shelter. It was a concept older than recorded history, used by the Inuit in their igloos, by the nomadic peoples of Mongolia in their yurts, by anyone who'd ever had to survive real cold with nothing but natural materials and knowledge. Inside the shelter, the temperature was already noticeably warmer than outside, even though the sun was hidden behind storm clouds. The greenhouse effect was working even with indirect light. The clear plastic sheeting allowed what little solar radiation penetrated the clouds to enter, and the dark stones absorbed it immediately. The glass bottles, arranged in their honeycomb pattern, created hundreds of small air pockets that served as insulation, breaking up the thermal bridge that would have conducted heat directly out of the structure. Harold arranged his sleeping area carefully. The wool blankets went directly on the stones, which would radiate heat upward through the night. He positioned himself not in the center, where the thermal mass was greatest but slightly offset, allowing the heat to circulate around him rather than directly beneath him, which would have been too warm and would have wasted the stored energy too quickly. Outside, the storm intensified. By 2 p.m., the wind was howling at 40 miles per hour with gusts reaching 60. The temperature had plummeted to 0 degrees Fahrenheit and was still falling. The snow was no longer falling but flying horizontally, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet. The Weather Service had upgraded their warnings to the highest level, advising people to stay indoors, avoid all travel, and check on elderly neighbors. Patricia Donovan called the sheriff's office. "I'm worried about Harold Winters on Cedar Street. He's elderly, and he's sheltering in some homemade structure in his yard during this blizzard. Someone needs to do a welfare check." Deputy Mike Torres, who'd bought firewood from Harold for years and respected the old man's competence, nevertheless had a job to do. He drove his four-wheel drive patrol vehicle slowly down Cedar Street, the snow already accumulating so fast his wipers could barely keep up. He pulled into Harold's driveway, grabbed his heavy flashlight, and trudged through the already knee-deep snow to the transparent structure that stood in the center of the yard. Through the translucent walls he could see movement inside. He knocked on the wooden frame near the entrance. "Harold, it's Deputy Torres. I need to check that you're okay." The inner flap moved, then the outer flap, and Harold's weathered face appeared, completely calm, not even shivering. "Mike, appreciate you coming out in this weather. I'm fine, as you can see." "Harold, it's 2 degrees outside. Wind chill is -15. And it's only going to get worse. The forecast says -30 by midnight. You need to come with me. We can take you to the emergency shelter at the high school." "What's the temperature in there?" Torres gestured at the shelter. Harold glanced at an old mercury thermometer hanging from the wooden frame. 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and rising slowly as the stones store heat. Torres blinked. "That's impossible. There's no heat source." "The sun is the heat source. Has been for about 4.5 billion years, give or take. Those stones have been absorbing energy all morning, even through the clouds. They'll release it slowly over the next 12 to 16 hours. By tomorrow morning, when the sun comes back out, the cycle starts again." "Harold, with all respect, the sun is hidden. It's a blizzard. There's no solar energy to collect." "Visible light isn't the only form of solar radiation, Mike. Infrared passes through clouds just fine. Not as much as on a clear day, sure, but enough. Those dark stones are converting every bit of it to heat. The plastic sheeting and the air pockets in those bottles are trapping it inside. Basic physics. Same reason a car gets hot when you leave it in a parking lot even on a cloudy day." Torres looked at the structure with new respect. "And you're comfortable in there?" "More comfortable than I'd be in that high school gymnasium with 200 other people, breathing recycled air and eating donated sandwiches. No offense to the emergency management folks. They do good work. But I prefer my own space." "You have enough food and water?" "Enough for a week if it comes to that." "And if something goes wrong? If this structure fails?" "Then I walk 50 feet to my house and go inside." "Mike, I'm not stupid. This is an experiment, but it's not a reckless one. I have backup plans. I always have backup plans." Torres radioed back to dispatch. "Welfare check on Harold Winters complete. Subject is safe, sheltered, and lucid. He's prepared for extended stay. No intervention needed at this time." As the deputy's vehicle disappeared into the whiteout conditions, Harold sealed the doors again and returned to his stone circle. He'd brought a book, a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe that he'd read probably 50 times over his life, and he settled in to read by the dimming natural light that filtered through the storm. By 6 p.m., the power went out across Pinewood Ridge. The storm had brought down power lines in 17 locations, snapped utility poles like matchsticks, and overloaded the grid with everyone running their electric heaters at maximum capacity. The entire town went dark in a span of 3 minutes. Marcus Chen's livestream cut off mid-sentence. His house, which was all electric with a state-of-the-art smart home system, became useless in an instant. The temperature inside started dropping immediately. He grabbed his phone, checking the battery, 63%, and wrapped himself in blankets while he tried to figure out how to start the generator he'd bought, but never actually learned to operate. Patricia Donovan's house fared better initially. She had a gas furnace and gas service was still running. But after 2 hours, even her furnace shut down. It needed electricity to run the blower, the thermostat, and the ignition system. She called the utility company and got a recorded message saying that crews were working as fast as safely possible, but that restoration times were estimated at 3 to 7 days. Sarah Mitchell's livestream audience watched as she bundled up in every piece of clothing she owned and huddled in her bathroom, which she'd read online was the warmest room in a house during a power outage. Her followers from warm climates sent laughing emojis and suggestions to just go to a hotel, not understanding that every hotel within 100 miles was either full or without power themselves. Inside his transparent shelter, Harold barely noticed when the distant lights of the town went dark. He wasn't connected to the grid. He never had been, at least not for heating. His kerosene lamp provided a small, warm circle of light. He ate his dinner cold, the venison stew rich and satisfying, the vegetables still holding their texture because he'd canned them properly, processing them at the right temperature for the right amount of time, following the same methods his mother had taught him 60 years ago. The thermometer inside the shelter read 62 degrees now. The stones were releasing their stored heat in a steady, controlled manner. The air circulation he'd designed into the structure was working perfectly. Warm air rising, cooling slightly, sinking back down, creating a gentle convection current that distributed heat evenly throughout the space. Outside, the temperature had reached -15 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind chill was -45. Exposed skin would freeze in less than 5 minutes. The snow had accumulated to 3 feet in level areas, with drifts reaching 6 or 7 feet against buildings and vehicles. The town was completely shut down, roads impassable, emergency services stretched beyond capacity, responding to calls about carbon monoxide poisoning from people running generators indoors, house fires from people using barbecue grills for heat, and medical emergencies from elderly residents in homes dropping below safe temperatures. Harold heard none of this. He was reading his book, warm and comfortable, listening to the wind howl outside and feeling completely at peace. There was something deeply satisfying about being comfortable through your own knowledge and effort, rather than through purchased convenience. He didn't feel superior to his neighbors, he felt sorry for them actually, that they'd become so dependent on systems they didn't understand, and couldn't repair that they were helpless the moment those systems failed. Around 11 p.m. he extinguished the kerosene lamp to conserve fuel. The darkness was absolute for a moment, but then his eyes adjusted and he could see the faint glow of the snow through the translucent walls, the storm light creating a dim, ghostly illumination. He wrapped himself in his wool blankets, positioned himself on the warm stones, and went to sleep to the sound of the wind trying and failing to penetrate his simple shelter. The thermometer read 64 degrees. Outside it was -22 and still falling. Harold woke at dawn, same as always, his internal clock unaffected by the storm that still raged outside. The first thing he noticed was the warmth. The stones beneath his wool blankets were still radiating heat, though not as intensely as the night before. He checked the thermometer, 59 degrees. The shelter had lost only 5 degrees over the entire night, despite outside temperatures that had bottomed out at -28 degrees Fahrenheit. He sat up slowly, his joints stiff not from cold, but from age, and looked through the translucent walls. The storm had eased slightly, the wind down to maybe 30 miles per hour, the snow falling steadier but less violently. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, creating a diffuse glow in the eastern sky. Within an hour, as the sun rose higher, Harold watched his design work exactly as intended. Even through the heavy cloud cover, solar radiation penetrated. The hundreds of glass bottles in the walls caught and concentrated what light there was, directing it inward. The dark stones began absorbing energy immediately, their surface temperature rising degree by degree. By 9 a.m., the interior temperature had climbed back to 63 degrees and was still rising. Outside, his neighbors were waking to a different reality. Marcus Chen's generator had run out of fuel at 3 a.m. His house was now 42 degrees inside and dropping. He was wearing every piece of clothing he owned, huddled under blankets, his phone nearly dead because he'd been using it all night to distract himself from the cold and document his misery for social media. Patricia Donovan had burned through her emergency candles trying to keep warm, managing to get her master bedroom up to maybe 50 degrees by closing off the rest of the house. She was wearing ski gear indoors and seriously considering calling for emergency evacuation. Pride be damned. Sarah Mitchell had actually tried to leave during the night, making it as far as her driveway before her car refused to start, the engine oil too thick from the cold, the battery drained by temperatures it was never designed to handle. She'd trudged back inside, defeated, and spent the rest of the night shivering in her bed, wondering if she was going to lose toes to frostbite. By noon, Deputy Torres was making rounds again, this time in a snowmobile because the roads were completely impassable. He stopped at Harold's property and was astonished to see smoke rising from the chimney of the old man's house. He killed the snowmobile engine and trudged to the transparent shelter first. Harold emerged from the double-door entrance, not bundled in heavy winter gear but wearing his normal flannel shirt and work pants. His breath didn't even fog in the air immediately around the shelter. "Morning, Mike," Harold said calmly. "Storm's easing up some." Torres pulled down his balaclava, his face red from the cold, despite all his gear. "Harold, how are you not frozen solid? It's still negative 18 degrees out here. 71 degrees in there." Harold gestured back at the shelter. "Sun broke through about an hour ago. Those stones are drinking it up like they've been thirsty. Should peak around 75, maybe 76 by mid-afternoon." Torres stepped closer to the shelter, close enough to feel warmth radiating from it. "This is insane. You built a functional solar heater using garbage and stones." "Not garbage. Materials. And the knowledge of how to use them properly." Harold paused. "How are the neighbors doing?" "Not great. We've got about 40 people requesting evacuation. Most homes are below 50 degrees now. Some are down in the 30s. The emergency shelter at the high school is overwhelmed and they're running low on generator fuel." Harold was quiet for a moment, then made a decision. "Tell them they can come here. Not into the shelter. It's sized for one person and adding bodies would disrupt the thermal balance. But my house, I've got the wood stove running. It's probably 85 degrees in there. I can fit a dozen people comfortable, more if they don't mind being crowded." "Harold, you sure? Some of these folks were making fun of you just 2 days ago." "Don't matter, they're cold and I'm not. Simple as that." Within 2 hours, Harold's living room was filled with neighbors. Marcus Chen sat closest to the wood stove, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Harold had brewed. Patricia Donovan was on the couch, 3 blankets wrapped around her despite the tropical heat of the room, still shivering from her core being cold for so long. Sarah Mitchell was in the corner, her phone charging from Harold's small solar battery bank finally silent. Tom Bradley, the engineer who'd mocked Harold from his Tesla, stood by the window looking out at the transparent shelter that glowed slightly in the afternoon sun. "Harold, I need to understand how that thing works. I'm an engineer and I can't figure out how you're maintaining 70-degree temperatures with no power source." Harold handed him a cup of coffee. "The sun is the power source. Always has been. Those dark stones absorb solar radiation, visible light, infrared, all of it. They convert it to heat and store it in their mass. Stone has high thermal capacity, meaning it takes a lot of energy to heat up, but once it's warm, it releases that heat slowly over many hours. The plastic sheeting and glass bottles create insulation layers that prevent the heat from escaping too quickly. The whole system is balanced so that the heat absorbed during the day equals the heat lost during the night, plus a little extra. But it's cloudy. There's barely any sun. Doesn't matter as much as you think. Infrared radiation penetrates clouds. Not as efficiently as direct sunlight, but enough. And when the sun does break through like it did this morning, the system supercharges. Those stones are probably holding enough heat right now to keep that shelter at 60+ degrees for the next 36 hours, even if the sun disappeared completely. Tom shook his head slowly. We've spent billions developing high-tech heating systems, smart thermostats, heat pumps, and you've recreated the same result with rocks and plastic sheeting. Not the same result, Harold corrected. Better result. Your systems need constant energy input. Mine needs one input, sunlight, which is free and infinite for practical purposes. Your systems fail when the power goes out. Mine keeps working because it was never dependent on the grid in the first place. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors arrived, referred by Deputy Torres. Harold's house became a refuge, the wood stove working overtime, Harold occasionally stepping outside into the brutal cold to bring in more firewood from the covered pile behind his house. He moved through the cold like it didn't affect him, while his neighbors shivered just watching him through the windows. The storm finally broke on the third day. The sun emerged fully, brilliant and sharp in the crystalline air. Harold's shelter became almost too warm, reaching 78 degrees inside, and he had to crack the entrance doors slightly to vent excess heat. His neighbors watching from his living room windows saw him adjust his system with small, practiced movements, balancing temperature and airflow like a conductor directing an orchestra. When the power finally came back on, 5 days after the storm hit, Harold's neighbors returned to their homes quietly. Some thanked him. Others left without a word, embarrassed perhaps by how completely they'd misjudged the old man and his methods. Marcus Chen deleted his mocking videos. Sarah Mitchell posted a tribute to the brilliant neighbor who saved us all. Patricia Donovan brought Harold a pie she'd baked, a peace offering for doubting him. Harold accepted them all graciously, but he didn't gloat. He simply returned to his life, dismantling the transparent shelter carefully, saving every component for potential future use. The stones went back to the creek bed, the bottles to recycling, the wood back to his pile. If you found this story valuable, if it changed how you think about self-reliance and simple solutions to complex problems, leave a comment below telling us what survival skill you want to learn next. Your engagement helps us share more stories like Harold's with people who need to hear them.